Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us. My name is Megan Corrado. I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy with the Alliance for Peace Building. For those of you who may not know AFP, we are a network of 200 plus membership organizations operating in 181 countries around the world, trying to build peace and prevent conflict. Today, we're honored to have one of our very close partners and member organizations with us to talk about the Institute for Economics Peace and I always mess it up. The Institute for Economics and Peace's recently published Positive Peace Report. Today, we're going to hear from Steve Killelea. He's the founder and executive chairman of IEP, who will explore the latest findings from this report. A bit of background, the Positive Peace Report is an annual analysis of changes in the underlying drivers of peacefulness and conflict worldwide. What makes this report so interesting this year in particular is its analysis of the conditions pre-pandemic, the before times, and since, now that we've had a little bit of distance since the full-fledged crisis. The report is able to surface new trends, identify warning signs for potential violence and conflict, and ascertain which countries are well-positioned to navigate increasing global uncertainty. The Positive Peace Report and other IEP research publications are so critical to the work of IEP and the AFP and the larger peace building community. They help us make the case to governments and donors for why peace building and conflict prevention is so critical. This report in particular helps predict potential falls in peacefulness and is a vital tool in helping us and decision makers identify opportunities for prevention. So thank you, Steve. Thank you, the whole IEP team, for working on this incredible resource. We're so pleased to have you here and so appreciative of all the work that goes into these types of reports. So we're anxious to drill down on some of the key findings. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience.
Thank you. Great. Well, thank you for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be here to talk about the Positive Peace, the 2024 report. And I guess there's a lot of new work in here, which I'm going to go through. So the trends on positive peace, I'll put a little bit of time in them. Then I'm going to come back to a lot of the work we're doing around systems thinking, then the way you can apply positive peace for predictions of future conflict, and also other ways of being able to use it as a measurement tool. So without more to do, I'm going to share a screen now and we'll get underway. And this is going to be a very fast moving slide presentation, as they always are. Right, okay. Okay, so Positive Peace Report 2024. So just a couple of the points on the Institute for Economics and Peace. So the Institute for Economics and Peace was set up to understand the intersection between business, peace and economics, places special emphasis on metrics to measure peace and then to ascribe an economic value to changes in peace. We've got a whole range of products, and the assumption is most people in the audience know most of these products, such as the Global Peace Index, Global Terrorism Index, Ecological Threat Report, and Positive Peace. We also have other things which we do. So at this stage, we've got 5,500 different ambassadors we've trained around the world. They're now in over 150 countries. We've got a Future Trends that covers the global news once a week on interesting stories pertaining to the areas we're all interested in. That's about 125,000 subscribers now. We have a number of online education events which we do as well. Right now, assuming most of the audience understands positive peace, but I'll just do a very, very quick recap on it for those who don't. So two forms of peace: negative peace, which is the absence of violence or fear of violence; positive peace, which is the attitude, institutions and structures which create and sustain peaceful society. So negative peace, you need that to understand how to stop violence, but what actually creates a resilient society which doesn't fall into conflict is very, very different. So what you need to stop violence and what you need to have be healthy and have resilience is very different. And that is what we call positive peace. So to arrive at positive peace, we take the Global Peace Index, which is an actual measure of peace. We've got about 24,000 different indicators with about the 50,000 we've got in Sydney, which we then use mathematical modelling and then statistical analysis to understand the qualities associated with the peace. We then take the ones with the highest correlations. We now run more statistical analysis to put them into clumps. That comes out into 8 different clumps, which then become the pillars of positive peace. We then further turn that round into another index, and we have 3 indicators for each of those 8 clumps or 8 pillars. And from that, we use the strength of the correlations to derive what the weighting is for each of the indicators. And so what we've got with our form of positive peace and the Positive Peace Index is something which is purely derived empirically. So it's not my ideas, it's not the researcher's idea, it's really the way the data falls out, and that's the power of the Positive Peace Index. The latest evolution is to HALO, which looks at how do you go about understanding how societal systems operate, and that's really quite profound. So very quickly, if we look at the 8 pillars of positive peace, what they're associated with: higher per capita income, societies which are more resilient, better environmental outcomes, higher measures of well-being and happiness, and better performance on a whole range of developmental indicators, including the SDGs. So positive peace in many ways describes an optimal environment in which human potential can flourish. Now, just to bring it home, if we look since 2009 to 2021, we look at countries which improved in positive peace compared to countries which deteriorate in positive peace. The GDP growth rate is almost twice as high. It's about 2% per annum higher. So you take that over the 13 years, and you find that you're over double the size of your GDP growth. We look at well-being and happiness. This is incredibly tight correlation, 0.93, really high. And you can see by the shape of the curve here just how closely it's aligned with increases in positive peace. Similarly, we can find similar sorts of things when we're looking at environment. We can, again, scatter plot here. This comes from work done by Yale. Again, we can see very strong relationship between ecological performance and positive peace. Human development is very much similar again. And as we come down and we start to look at the various developmental measures in the Human Development Report as compared to the levels of positive peace. And we can see as the peace falls, the effectiveness of development also falls with it. Now, this is a quick mud map of the world covering positive peace, red being bad, dark green being very, very good. And you can see that quite often it's clustered around regions. So if we look at it, we can see that you're running from South India up through over to the Middle East. You've got a bracket of very low peace. You can see the same in Africa. Come down, you'd see United States and Canada, very similar. See most of Latin America is very similar. When we come over to Asia, you've got some, East Asia, you've got a number of strong countries performing on that as well. Now come in to hit the trends. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the trends. What I'm going to do more is hit the new research which we've done, which I think you'll all find very, very interesting. So there were two periods of peace. The first one was from the time we started doing in the index, and so we'll say from 2009 up to 2020, and that's when COVID hit. So positive peace had improved every year up to 2020, and we were just, at that point, we're just expecting it to keep on improving. Yet since COVID, it has deteriorated each year. So we've got 3 years worth of data, and you can see the deterioration. Very, very big drop in 2020 with the advent of COVID, then just more milder drops the last couple of years. And I'll have a graph on that in a few minutes. And the different domains in positive peace performed differently as well. Attitudes domain had the most significant deterioration of any of the various domains, and we'll come to that in a few minutes. However, countries which were high in positive peace had the fastest recoveries. The economies bounced back. They had the effective health institutions, which meant they were better able to deal with the crisis as it occurred. And again, you could see just the strength and resilience of countries high in positive peace when hit with a shock, being able to actually deal with it more effective and recover. So this, if we look at this, this gives you an idea of the different domains. What I want you to focus on is the blue line. And so the blue line shows the overall drop which happened in the positive piece through the COVID era. And the last year it's sort of recovered, but it's still well down on where it was when we look from the start of COVID. So low on this is good. So if we're looking at it and we go from 2009 through to 2019, you can see it's slowly improving as the scores get lower. Then you can see from 2019 on the deterioration. What's fascinating is if we look at it also, we can see the structure domain within positive peace was improving dramatically. That's the purple line down to 2019. And again, kick up, a slight improvement since, but it's still slightly under where it was in 2019. If we look at the attitudes domain, that's the red one at the top, we can see, because it's going up, that it's deteriorated all the way along. And we can see it just accentuate and get to a new level of deterioration in 2022 and 2023. So now if we dig deeper into the various pillars, this gives you an idea of the changes in the last decade. So free flow of information, and the main reasons that's the biggest improvement is because of the uptake of the internet and mobile phones globally, because that is one way in which information gets shared. Surprisingly, maybe to some, equitable distribution of resources has improved. A lot of that you can see through the reflection of health systems around the world. Acceptance of the rights of others, that's largely driven by gender, has improved. Human capital is somewhat up. And overall, there's a 1% improvement over the last decade. Would have probably been 3%, except for COVID. If we come down to the bottom of it, good relationships with neighbouring countries has fallen dramatically. Well-functioning government is off, and low levels of corruption has also increased in the last decade globally. So it gives you a quick thumbnail sketch there. So now what's interesting, how does this look for the United States? So this is each of the various indicators. So again, if we look at the top of it, the ones which have improved, we find a free flow of information. That's access to the internet, mobile phones and data. That's improved dramatically. Gender inequalities improved. Per capita income's up. Expenditure on research and development's up. And is the number of the youth not in employment or education. That's improved as well. But we go down to the bottom, fractionalised elites, and you can see that reflected through the political system here. Quality of information, that comes back to what many people would see as hate mail and other stuff, and hate blogs and other such things. So the quality of information is down. Laws to support equal treatment of the population segments, that's down. Group grievances and exclusion by socioeconomic group. And life expectancy is also down, which is quite surprising. Part of that's been driven by COVID, but there are other issues going on before that. So as we can see, the states is got a lot of areas in which peacefulness can improve. Now I'm going to come around to something which a new piece of research which is in this report, and this is using positive peace as a predictive tool to be able to look at future changes in peace. And so what we'll do is we'll go back to a forecast we made in 2009 on the countries which we think were most likely to deteriorate in peace. And what we find is we've got an over 90% accuracy rate in the model, a bit over 90% actually, of the ones which we put down as most likely to deteriorate, all but three did deteriorate. And the ones which didn't, the improvements were very, very small. And so some of these are quite stark. So you've got Burkina Faso, Libya, you had Egypt, had Myanmar, Syria, just to name some. So it's a predictive capacity. This works very well. We move in and now look at what are the countries which we rank now as the ones with the greatest likelihood of deterioration. Equatorial Guinea, Angola, Laos, Eritrea, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Madagascar, Cambodia, Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, Rwanda, Bangladesh, Bhutan and Zambia, although with Bhutan, what we can see, the difference in the positive peace rankings and the difference in internal peace is the internal levels of the positive peace are increasing all the time. So I don't know if that one's likely to end up falling by the time we get to looking this again in 5 to 10 years. So the value of this piece of research is it gives the ability to take a long-term perspective on changes in peace. And that is incredibly important when it comes to being able to do long-term planning, because the reality, it's very hard to create the resilience for sustained peace overnight. See, it's a decade-long process. And through understanding the countries which are most likely to have the worst outcomes, it gives you an ability to be able to look and plan forward to try and avert those kind of outcomes. Now, all of this comes out, of the dynamic systems modelling, and this is what's called an attractor plane. And so in attractor planes, what happens is you get they're the areas of which countries get pulled into and find it hard to get out of. And so you've got the very, very top levels of positive peace. You've got countries which are highly resilient and they don't change much. And at the bottom end of it, you've got the countries with the worst conflicts and they don't change so much either. So that's obviously caused the conflict trap, which we all know of, but you've got the opposite there as well. Now, what happens is you've got a group of countries in the centre and they have this, what we term positive peace deficit. And they're the ones most likely to move towards an attractor basin, which is conflict. So on that basis, I'll just move on. So we've done a lot of work and we've developed a new series of products based around the concept of halo. And so Halo is a revolutionary way to be able to actually now understand how systems operate. And so we use the word halo because you can't actually directly perceive what's happening in a system. It's a bit like our bodies. You can't directly perceive what's happening there. But what we can do is we can do all sorts of the diagnosis, take our blood pressure, measure our heart rate, and a whole range of other things to actually, which are indicators to be able to see what's happening inside us. Similarly with societies, we only have data in many ways and qualitative perspectives to actually understand the way societal systems operate. Therefore, Halo is looking at measuring what's illuminated from those systems so we can better understand it. That's the origin of the word Halo. So the Halo approach is unique. It's built mainly out of the study of biological systems, and human systems are really an extraction of that. In many ways, the same principles operate. So what we do is we take a building block approach where the attributes can be mixed according to the knowledge and needs. And I'll come back to what these attributes are in a few minutes. Consists of 28 unique attributes, and you can mix and match them for understanding a system. And we also call them building blocks. Now, this is a reiterative process. You do it once, you can then reuse it again. And if there's something you want, you can upgrade it every year. Systems usually change slowly, other than when they go through tipping points. So the analysis using this process can be as long as a day, or as long as a year, or as short as a day. And we can divide these 28 building blocks up into 3 different things. What first is defining the content of the system, the others, the dynamics, the way the system operates, and finally, then the analysis of the system. So I think one of the key things to understand quite often within trying to solve problems, we look at cause and effect. So if we're looking at the effect in physics, it doesn't come back and have any influence on the cause. So if we're looking at physics and I take a cup, throw it into the area, I can catch it because it'll always fall at the same rate. One of the things with empiricism and the way we think about solving problems is with an empiric mind, is it came out of the study of physics, and there's great breakthroughs in that. But when understanding systems, it's a different set of principles we have to operate on, because the effect will come back and influence the cause. You also have encoded norms, which tend to then try and keep the system in a steady state. Think of how difficult it is to change the conflict systems in which you're operating. And that's because systemic effects, the encoded norms which get built into it, and stocks and flows, and quite often the historical progress of those systems. So analysing systems comes about through not having a concept of necessarily cause and effect, but understanding the systemic interactions. First thing which is important is understanding the boundaries of the systems. And what are the, so what makes for a system and when isn't something a system? So for example, if you've got boundaries like the edge of a country, that's a very, very good way to define a system, because it's pretty well contained within the laws and the cultural norms of that country. But if you came down to a soccer team, social soccer team, which got together once a week, would you really call that a system? So the mechanism for being able to tell the strength of a system is how much of it is actually controlled within the system and how much of it comes from other systems outside. So now systems lie within systems lie within systems. So if we think about it, you have a family unit that can come up into a community, community can come up to a state, state can come up into a country, country can come up into the global order. All the human systems then come under an ecological system, which then comes under a planetary system, solar system, which then comes under the universe. So systems can keep scaling up. Understanding the intent of systems and subsystems is incredibly important, because unlike physical systems, systems still have intent. There's stated intent And then there's the actual intent. And the actual intent can be very different from the stated intent. Stated intents are usually idealistic. Actual intents are the way the system operates. So always important to understand what measures exist within the system. One of the things which is not, we all know it, but we don't study it enough, is the path dependencies of a system. What are the historical values and the history, the economic history of the country, the political history of the country, and then the values and morals within that country to actually understand where it arrived, where it came from. So what's important is not so much the past, but it's the future. So understanding the momentum of the system is really important. And do that through concepts of stocks and flows. There's emergent qualities. You can determine these emergent qualities through the stocks and flows included in the processes. And then you've got to understand the feedback loops, which are based on these flows. The feedback loops come back, alter the input, and then alter the way the system operates. They're key to identifying coded norms within the systems. They have values. So some of the examples is like what are the cultural norms and values? What is the intent? What are the legal frameworks? What are the economic mechanisms which are included within it, the system, and many more. And quite often following the money is the best way to understand the flows, because the things with the most emergence, the ones which will be growing quickly, either in terms of people as a movement or money in terms of that's where money's flowing. So I might move through this part fairly quickly now. Okay, so in terms of defining systems, move you through a quick process. So we've got processes for analysing systems. First one's define the system and its bounds, understanding the major systems, what is the intent of the system. So then what is the purpose, function and potential of each of the subsystems? Because that'll determine the way they interact with each other to create the overall system. Identifying the stocks and flows, that may be examples of prisoners, going into a criminal justice system, being rehabilitated and coming back out into the workforce. So that'd be one example. If you can look at stocks and flows, the money put into, let's say, a penal system. Another thing you could look at is another form of the stock and flow which comes in. And you can also do this with ideas as well. You're going to understand the encoded norms within the system, developing system diagrams. So quite often we get to a point within doing the development where it's important to understand the systemic interactions. You can do that through diagrams. Understanding the cultural values. And then there's also archetypes, system archetypes, which are quick ways of, or heuristics of being able to look at a system and to understand it. You've got the path dependency. And then there's forms of dynamic modelling you can use, as well as static modelling. And in the end, you've got to bring it all together. And finally, we then look at it through and analyse what the outcomes are through positive peace. This has been really fast, but I'd recommend everyone to go and have a look at the Systems Thinking and Halo report, which will put this into a lot of detail. We've also done a lot of work, which comes out in this year's Positive Peace report on understanding country intent. And so one of the things you do, you can look at the political, economic, international relations and social policies of countries. Then what you can do is you can take any one country and you can move 10 places either side and see what are those countries closely associated with it. Now you do that across the 4 domains and you've got the ability now to be able to determine like countries. This becomes really, really quite interesting. So now when we're doing that, what we do is we come down with a group of countries and we can now rank the countries with the other countries which are most similar. Interesting, Australia comes up, more countries similar to it in scores than any other country, followed by Estonia, Netherlands, Canada, Switzerland, Germany, United Kingdom, Ireland and Iran. What you'll note of those 9 countries, what you'll find, 4 of them are actually based on UK legal principles. And so you can see the extent. to which it comes together. One of the more interesting things out of this study was, as you move into the more authoritarian states, they tend to be less and less alike with other countries. So the Western democracies are the ones which are the most similar, with at least 6 countries. So 36 countries didn't match in any of the 3 or more with any other country in 3 or more intent domains. They're mainly the authoritarian countries. They're very, very different in the way they operate. And so if we look at some of the countries and the ones they're most closely aligned with, you can see Australia, Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, Iran, and the United States. I'll just let you have a quick look at that for a few minutes, just to get a feel. So one of the good things about understanding this analysis, you know where your natural allies lie. Also, if you're looking for policies which you want to implement, you know the countries to go to look at the policies which may have been implemented there, or look at the ones which have worked and the ones which haven't worked, which you can bring back into your own country. So these things are really important in terms of being able to set policy. Understanding countries which you may be in competition with, also a great way of understanding who are they aligned with. So we come over and look at Iran, we've got a pretty clear idea of where their lie. These can form into natural clusters. So you can take them and put them into clusters and find that the largest cluster is the 34 countries, which can loosely describe as Western democracies. They're the ones in purple on this. The next one is MENA and Africa. And that has 22 countries, which are more closely aligned. Now, if we look at this globally, this is what we can see. The colours don't actually match the prior graph, but we can see the Western democracies are in green. So we can see that across there, and we can see the Middle East African component, which is this one's expressed in red. So give you an idea of, and then you can see quite interestingly, China and India are somewhat similar as well, but often their own, with Myanmar included. Now, you can use positive peace to effectively measurement as well. So what we've recently done in conjunction with DT Global, we got a grant from them to be able to look at how can you use positive peace in a setting as a survey-based measurement tool. And so the idea of this is you can take the survey we developed, and what you can do then is it's designed to be used in any culture anywhere in the world and at the community level. And so from this angle, one, it's based on empiricism. This springs from the positive peace and asking questions around the 8 pillars of positive peace, plus a couple of questions on negative peace as well. And that gives the ability to, because it's a simple 10-question survey. You can run it off an iPhone. And it's a quick way of being able to determine what the local people think within a project. And so these are the questions. So we use a simple smiling-faced mechanism for people to say the answers to it. And so there's a lot of thoughts gone into this. And so what it means is now you can have a community, you can now ask these questions into a local community, so you can see the changes over time in the 8 factors of positive peace. And what you can also do, it gives you the ability, if it's a project which you're doing, let's say it's World Vision who are implementing a project, gives the ability now to be able to come along and see the effect of the project within the community as well. So these are very simple questions. So asking questions of what do they think of the federal government in places like Africa, where you're down at very poor levels, don't make sense. But they do understand they have community leaders. They could be tribal leaders or it could be local government. They do understand how what they think of the community leaders. The way local resources are shared is a very good way of looking at equitable distribution of resources. So that can be things like water, food, healthcare. And as we move through the questions now gives you an idea of how it all relates back to the 8 pillars of positive peace. And that was a very, very fast moving presentation, but that's the end of it. So look, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate that excellent overview of the report. Would love to invite colleagues online to drop questions in the chat. I'm happy to field them as well. So, what was the most surprising finding you found this year?
I think the most surprising finding actually was the way positive peace dropped through the COVID era. I think we were all expecting a positive peace to just keep on improving through that period. So I think that for me was the most surprising thing. What it shows is just that societies have a level of resilience, and that resilience can be measured through positive peace. And so the societies, the highest levels of resilience were the ones which had the systems which could cope with the shock and then best adapted coming out the back end.
Do you think we're heading in the right direction after this big shock? You know, based on the data you looked at this year, do you think some of these negative impacts will kind of tease out over time and improve?
Well, I think there's a relationship between actual peace and positive peace. So as actual peace falls, positive peace generally falls with it. So I think as we're looking at the global situation at the moment, we're on a precipice. So it's particularly the conflict in the Middle East that really needs to be contained. If it spreads, then you're going to find a lot of areas of the world being destabilized. You can see a rise in Islamic State. So you note they've now had attacks in Iran and they've had attacks in Russia. And we know in the area of the Levant, inside Syria, they're increasing operations there, and they're very active in the Sahel as well. So quite often the negative factors play into the positive peace because the two work in tandem. Improve the positive peace, you lessen the conflict. Increase the conflict, you deteriorate the positive peace. So I think for me at the moment, my major concern is the Ukraine and Gaza and the likelihood of them spreading.
Yeah, it's pretty challenging. One thing that really struck me was how accurate your list from 2009 was in predicting conflict and violence. So how have you sort of leveraged that as, you know, when you're talking to policymakers and say, hey, like this model works, we have the evidence here. And so how have you used that to really garner attention to, you know, the alarm bells you have in this report?
So the UN used it in the Secretary General's office, so we know of that. A lot of the time for politicians, they work on a much shorter time frame than a decade. They're generally very short term in their focus. So for policymakers, it's quite often hard to get them to pay attention to this piece of research, to be quite frank. But when you look at it in terms of aid organisations, could look at it in terms of USAID, you look at DFAT or other DFID in the UK, for example, they then pay attention to this work and then bring it in and can use it in conjunction with their own internal tools.
Yeah, the very short time span of politicians is always a challenge. It's something we grapple with a lot here at AFP. Maybe I can ask my colleague Nick to help us field some questions from online.
Yes, definitely. So we had a good question from somebody in the chat. I'm just scrolling up. In your report, how do you differentiate the improved economic prosperity correlation with improved peace? So when it comes to their variables of white collar and blue collar crimes, you know, examples of elites maybe evading the justice system or financial crimes, ability to pay out, crime ignored, underreported, lack of accountability. Just wondering if you take that into consideration. And something else that I'm going to just make about my own question. It seems like one of the most significant deteriorations was around the quality of information. So we see kind of this dichotomy where like there was a lot of improved access to information, which is great, which like reminds me of optimism around the Arab Spring, for example. But then obviously the quality of the information declines, which is indicative of disinformation. And it seems like that is contributing to kind of these tearing of relationships, right? So I'm curious what your thoughts are, just to Megan's point, like,
Sure.
where do you see that going next few years? Do you have any optimism for fixing that?
Sure. Right. We'll come back to the technical question first up.
Yeah.
And basically what we do is we take the internal measures of peacefulness inside the Global Peace Index. So there'd be things like the level of violent crime, the number of homicides per 100,000, number of people incarcerated per 100,000 population, number of police you need to do the protection, level of violent demonstrations, availability of guns, and a number of other things. And we bring them together as an internal measure of peace. And then we look at the GDP growth of the countries and then do the calculation that way. So we break it up into two groups. One will say is improvers in positive peace, the other's deteriorators in positive peace. Then we take the average of the GDP growth rate for the countries in those two groups and then compare it. So that's basically the way that one operates. Working with global data sets, you can only work with the data's available for all the countries which you want to cover. So that does give you limited coverage. So some of the things which were mentioned, like a separation between blue level crime, white level crime, you haven't got those kind of breakups coming out of UNODC, for example, to do it. We come back to the concept of misinformation. And so one of the things I think is missing from all of us in the peace field is there's certainly a lot of misinformation out there. And we're looking at AI now, and we're generally focusing in on the negatives and how do we actually create laws to stop the negatives from occurring. What I would postulate, AI is a great tool for now generating and propagating messages to counter extremism. So the question for me is, rather than railing against the things we don't like, how do we adopt these tools coming through for positive change? And that's the challenge I'd put out to the community there. Because certainly if you think about you use AI, you can use it in a positive way to say, okay, what are the universal values which people ascribe to? And all human beings are human beings. So there are universal values. We just seem to have lost it in the age we're in at the moment. So how does AI come up with what are these universal values? And then how then do you use AI to propagate those messages in meaningful, in emotionally, positively impactful ways, which then counter the misinformation which we don't like?
Thank you for that. I know this is an area of great interest to.
We're working on that. So we're trying to figure that out. Yeah.
And I invite everyone online to join our digital peace building community of practice. My colleague Nick Zarowski chairs that, and we are trying to think through what are the tools that we can use to exactly what, how do we use AI and technology for good? Also, how do we use it as a peace building community, as a sector to grow ourselves? How can we lift this is a very under-resourced sector. How do we use these tools to help with staff deficits, capacity deficits, things like that? So there are opportunities moving forward for good. Yeah.
So we're using AI extensively, generative AI extensively through IEP. I'll give you a few examples. One, we use it to generate code. So particularly R code, which speeds up analysis. Any of the reports we do these days, when it comes out of research, because the researchers are very good at researching, not so great at writing. So we pass everything through ChatGPT, which then sort of puts it into a standardized format, which we want. So we got a set of rules and guidelines, which we then get ChatGPT to run against. So we develop our own style of reporting. It's not chat GPT style, which you get when you say, hey, put out a resume or something like that. We've used it machine learning also in a whole range of others. A piece of research we did was to look at the effectiveness of the militaries around the world. So historically, you've only really been able to get the number of, let's say, ships, the number of planes, the number of tanks, the number of artillery. And so it's a count. So what we did was develop a piece of machine learning, which works off using the internet. And what it does is it goes through and provides each of the different items up by a generation. So the first generation's the 1960s, and then you move through the 70s, 80s, et cetera, et cetera. So the more recent, let's say, a fighter is, the more sophisticated it is. So we give it a rating on that. And that radically, when you look at it, changes what looks like the balance of military power globally. For example, the US is the one with the most capabilities. In fact, it's double the capabilities of China, which is next. Whereas China, when you look at on just number of things, is almost on parity. It's just that the stuff they've got isn't sophisticated. Iran, for example, looking at number of planes, comes in 5th or 6th. However, when you put sophistication in, it drops down into the 40s. So it gives a better way of being able to understand what the future outcome of conflicts could be. That'd be another one which we use, and there's many more examples as well, but I'll stop there.
Can I jump in? We had a question from Chick Dombach in the chat, who is very closely tied with the history of AFP. Kind of question, like, and I'm trying to be an optimist here. I think based on the report, what do you see as kind of the central recommendations for what advocates in the peacebuilding field and peacebuilding organizations can really point to in terms of this works for reducing the frequency, severity of violence? Or what are, another way to phrase it is, like, what do you see as the greatest sources of resilience based on the report that can counter the more negative trends that the report also captures?
Right. So I think for us, it's back to, I think the thing, and it was pretty rushed, probably could do with a whole presentation because it wasn't actually wrapped fully in context, is the systems side of it. We think we're talking systems, but we're not. Most people think they're working in systems, but they're not. They're not. They're just, they're working some simple ideas of what they think systems are. And that's what, with the Halo work, that's what's groundbreaking, absolutely groundbreaking. It's not simple to use, but that is groundbreaking. And to really, for us to get in and solve a lot of the conflicts issues, we've got to look at it systemically, and we've got to put aside a lot of the time our own values in doing that and work with the values of the communities in which we're operating, because a lot of the time they're very, very different path dependencies. We may want a particular set of outcomes, but systems, you need to move in that direction. You need to stimulate them from multiple directions. Whereas a lot of the time we'll come in with 3 or 4 things which we think this is what we need to do to stimulate a system, but it's a lot more than that. So then the idea is many small thrusts to move you in the right direction. Systems change generally slowly unless they go through tipping points. Then they can change fast. Those tipping points can be positive too. Tipping point can be going in a positive direction or can be going in a negative direction. And there's a certain set of measurements where that's the case. And you find that mainly around the middle of the index is its tipping point. And those tipping points take you towards the attractor planes. One, you're moving into a highly peaceful society with plenty of resilience. If you're moving in the other direction, now you're moving down towards the conflict trap. So I think the system stuff and the application of that, I think is probably the most interesting thing. So we're now taking the positive peace framework, and we've got governments in many parts of the world now starting to implement it. So the Philippines, for example, they used it in Mindanao. They're now rolling that framework out in every district inside the Philippines, and doing that through the local government. Even the armies has adopted it, and the police. So I think the understanding things systemically. We've had World Vision. They've now standardised on positive peace. They'll be rolling that out globally in all the countries where they do developmental aid. And again, they'll attach it into the projects they're doing because again, to be able to determine the interventions which they should be doing in their projects with a peace lens built through the actual framework of the project as they deliver the aid. So that using the positive piece, I think, from it's a simple mechanism to understand systems, it works and works well. And we've seen that in the application all around the world. And I guess the other thing which I can see, and this is from our own perspective, that the conflict does create more interest in peace. So while the negative on one side builds, it motivates people on the other side to take action as well. So the question really, I think for us in the peace building community is how do we actually move the frameworks which are in our mind and move it to the centre so that we can actually appeal to things like business? How can we appeal to people who we may not necessarily share the same values with? But we really, if we want to make peace, we have to communicate with and motivate. And so quite often I think we can fall into the trap of being out there trying to force people to do things rather than working with them in a peaceful way to try and bring them along a path and a journey and using systemic approaches to slowly move them in the direction we want to go rather than trying to push them there very, very quickly.
Thanks for that. I know we're coming up on time, but I have a quick question on the peacefulness survey. So really interesting. I'm just curious how you decided on the questions that ultimately ended up on the survey and what were some of those that were, on the cutting room floor?
Well, we started off with many iterations. The first iteration came out of people who were very experienced in survey work. So they ended up questions which are fine for you and me and obviously the audience here. But if you're moving it down to someone who's got a half-acre farm and they're monocropping pineapples and they've got 2 crops a year, that they don't relate. They don't have any relation back. Sort of corruption, for example, that's written, you ask how corrupt is your society? For most people, there isn't a concept of corruption because it's built right into the systems. So it's really about, do they have fees which they're getting charged they think are unfair?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, a lot of the time that comes back to facility payments or having to bribe police to solve a crime, things like that. So we came back to very, very simple questions. IEP has a sister organisation called the Charitable Foundation, and it's done about 260 developmental projects around the world, many of them in Africa and Asia. And so we pulled on a lot of the expertise in that to be able to help us get really basic questions. So the power of the survey is its simplicity and its ability to be able to be leveraged across cultures. That's the power of the survey.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear a little bit of a call to action to the community to start using, the survey, but this data too. I was really interested to hear about World Vision applying the data here. We always call for programs to be conflict sensitive, gender sensitive, et cetera, but taking, what we know, why not apply it now and use our limited resources in the most effective way? So any last questions online, Nick, we want to highlight? Great. So we have just a moment left. So any final words, any other issues you wanted to highlight from the report before we sign off?
Yeah, look, I think I'd just make a general comment, and it's it's really around the global situation at the moment. It's at times like this that the peace community needs to come together and work on many of these major issues. And quite often the issues can seem beyond our capabilities. How do we get Netanyahu to ease up on Gaza? How do you get Putin to not want to capture more land in the Ukraine? And the way solving these problems is through international efforts and communities. So what we need to do as a peacekeeping people, we need to be able to work out how can we use our resources to press countries which can be supportive of stopping these initiatives to take action. And I think one of the things we've got a breakdown in the global system at the moment, but on the other hand, you can see it realigning and reforming in different ways. So it's how do we get active on a global stage to motivate large players to actually do the work they need to do to try and maintain peace.
Well, thank you, Steve, so much. Appreciate all the amazing insights from the report. Thank you to the whole IEP team for this incredible publication. We're so appreciative of your time and your analysis. And thank you everyone online for joining us. We had a great crowd here today. So make sure you read the whole report, apply it in your programming and advocacy, and we look forward to getting together soon. So thank you all.
Great. Actually enjoyed being here.